Despite the use of a narrator, the Harry Potter books are largely told from the perspective of Harry Potter himself. Now, whilst we've all fallen in love with these books and enjoy reading them over and over again, have you ever wondered, would any of the 7 Harry Potter books be more interesting if they were told from the perspective of a different character? Well, I have. So for today's video, I'm going to suggest an alternative main character for each Potter book, from the Philosopher's Stone all the way through to the Deathly Hallows, that I think would be extremely interesting to see their perspective of the events of that specific book. If you're new here, please like the video and comment what you think of my answers in the comments, and if you'd change any of them, but most importantly, please do hit subscribe. But without further ado, let's get started with the Philosopher's Stone, Albus Dumbledore. So I've had to make a rule for this video that a character can only be suggested once, because I kind of think Albus Dumbledore as an alternative main character for the entire series would be fascinating. But to make for a more interesting video, I'm only allowed to pick him for one book, and I actually think the most interesting book to see from Dumbledore's perspective would be book number 1. Starting off from the very beginning, the night that Harry's parents have died. Imagine knowing just how much Dumbledore knew up to that point. We know that he'd already heard the prophecy, but how much of that had he actually put together? Was he 100% sure that Harry would eventually have to kill Voldemort? Did he even know at that point that Voldemort would be able to come back? Had he worked out that Horcruxes could be in play? And if so, did he have any idea of what these Horcruxes could be? How many there could be? Where they could be? Because I think he knew quite a bit that night that they dropped Harry off at number 4 Privet Drive, but I want to know exactly how much. Then of course throughout the book there are loads of questions about Dumbledore's involvement, and did he just want Harry to basically do everything that year? Did he purposefully allow for Harry to wander off and learn how to use the Mirror of Erised in the hope that Harry would eventually go through the trapdoor and have to use it up against Quirrell? Did he deliberately make sure that Hagrid picked up the Philosopher's Stone from Gringotts Bank when Harry was there to help Harry put together the pieces later on? And did he really need to go to London on the night that Quirrell was going to attempt to steal the stone, or did he just want the Golden Trio to have a crack at it? All of these questions could be answered if we saw this book from Dumbledore's point of view. Up second, the Chamber of Secrets, I've gone for Ginny Weasley. So this is probably one of the easier choices on this list. Ginny is the obvious answer to be the alternative main character of the Chamber of Secrets book. Of course, very early on, Ginny gains possession of Voldemort's own diary, which, as we later go on to learn, is a Horcrux that possesses her throughout the year, meaning she is the one who is opening the Chamber of Secrets and is responsible for all of the attacks. Not only is it Ginny's first year in Hogwarts, so it'd just be interesting to see a different character enter the school for the first time, but how cool would it be to see her being possessed and to know exactly what was going through her head at that point? How much did she know? How long did it take for her to figure out who was the one who was responsible for the attacks? And for us, the readers, would we know what's going on as it's happening, or would we be as in the dark as Ginny? But perhaps the most interesting thing would be we would get an insight into Tom Riddle himself. Just how much was Tom Riddle revealing to Ginny in this diary? I think seeing this book from Ginny's perspective would give us a fascinating insight into young Voldemort, and potentially reveal clues about him that would be useful later on in the series. For number 3, The Prisoner of Azkaban, I've gone for Remus Lupin. So this book for me was a toss-up between 2 characters, Remus Lupin and Sirius Black. And I was very close for going with Sirius because there would be some incredibly interesting moments in this book. Of course, starting off with him escaping from Azkaban, how amazing would that be to get to see it? But also his many attempts to get into Hogwarts Castle and the times that he actually does manage it. I'd love to see his reaction when he realises where Peter Pettigrew is and that he can get to him. And of course it'd be fascinating to see what was going through his head the first times he saw Harry, knowing that Harry knew he was responsible for his parents' death. But that despite this, Sirius still loved Harry and would have wanted to be able to form a relationship with him at some point. And of course it'd be really interesting to see towards the end of the book just where Sirius fled to. But the reason I didn't go with Sirius is because I think despite all of this, there would be a large chunk of the book that would be filled with a whole load of nothing. Because essentially for a full year, he's basically just been scouting around Hogwarts, trying to work out how to get to Pettigrew. Which suggests that when he wasn't successfully breaking into the castle or trying to see Harry, he was basically just wandering around, probably trying to get food, probably looking out for Crookshanks, but not doing a whole lot. whereas Lupin, on the other hand, had a very eventful year. I'd love to know how easy or hard it was for Dumbledore to convince Lupin to take the Defense Against the Dark Arts role, especially because it was a jinxed position. And then when Lupin was in the role, just what was going through his head the whole time. I'd love to see Lupin and Harry's relationship from Lupin's perspective, and I think he'd give us some fascinating insights on the Marauders just by his reflections. But of course, there would be two most interesting parts of seeing this from Lupin's point of view. Number one would be seeing his transformation as a werewolf. I mean, that would be an incredible perspective to see. But even more interesting would be the moment he starts to piece together that Peter Pettigrew is still alive. How quick was he to determine that the map had to be right? And how quickly in his head did he come to the conclusion that Sirius must be innocent? I just think knowing the answers to all of these questions would be fascinating. By the way, since we're coming up to the halfway point, I've just got a couple of requests. Please do check the links in my description and head over and hit follow on TikTok. I post there daily. And check out the brand new Zogwarts Instagram account. I'd love to push us towards 1,000 followers across the summer. Thank you so much, everybody. For the Goblet of Fire, I've gone for Barty Crouch Jr. Okay, I'd say this is another very, very easy one. Barty Crouch Jr. is easily the most impressive and most interesting character in the Goblet of Fire book. First of all, we'd get to learn Voldemort's entire plan very, very early, and then get to follow Barty Crouch Jr.'s attempts to carry out this plan piece by piece under the nose of Albus Dumbledore. I'd love to know if Barty Crouch Jr. was receiving information from Voldemort throughout the year, or if Voldemort literally told him what to do, gave him a timeline, and then just left him to it. I also think it'd be really interesting to see him teaching other classes, not just the classes he teaches Harry's year, because by the sounds of it, he was a very, very good teacher. I think he'd have some fascinating stories, from times sneaking around Hogwarts to have to try and steal the ingredients for Polyjuice Potion. And of course, seeing him finally confront and take out his own father would be very interesting. For the Order of the Phoenix, I've gone for Mad-Eye Moody. So, from the fake Mad-Eye Moody to the real Mad-Eye Moody himself. Order of the Phoenix was a tricky one. Anyone who's watched my videos before ranking the books will know my biggest problem with Order of the Phoenix, and why I always rank it low on my list of favourite books, is because all the interesting stuff is going on outside of Hogwarts. So really, to avoid being a hypocrite, I had to pick someone who didn't go to Hogwarts in this book. However, I do think the best of both worlds would have been Dumbledore, because he was able to go out and lead the Order of the Phoenix whilst also being able to come back to Hogwarts when he wanted to. But as I said earlier, I can only have Dumbledore for one book, and I picked him already. But Mad-Eye Moody is kind of the second best option, because he is also out there leading the Order of the Phoenix in what is the first time period since Voldemort's proper return to his body. Now, whilst it's described to us through Harry that the Order of the Phoenix isn't doing a great deal, and most of their responsibilities revolve around taking watch in the Department of Mysteries, I'm not buying it. I think maybe some of the other members of the Order, for example Mr. Weasley, who was working a full-time job, may have been limited to those sorts of tasks because they still had their lives to lead. But somebody like Mad-Eye Moody, I am convinced he was doing more. He would have wanted to be out there working out how to stop Voldemort's return. Not only this, but it would have been great to see his perspective from the Battle of the Ministry towards the end of the book, because he is supposedly one of the strongest auras ever. And I'd be interested to know more stories from his past, and I think this would be revealed in a book specifically from Moody's perspective, because surely he'd think about the past, he'd reflect on the past, we could find out more about stuff he actually did in the First Wizarding War, which I think would be epic. For the Half-Blood Prince, I've gone for Draco Malfoy. Okay, time for another easy one, because the Half-Blood Prince book is all about Draco Malfoy. I've been critical of Malfoy before because I really dislike his ending in the Deathly Hallows. I think he is let down as a character, but that is mainly because of how well he is set up in the Half-Blood Prince. I think it would be amazing to see Draco's change in emotions from the beginning to the end of the book, because when we start off, I truly believe Draco thinks he's been chosen by Voldemort to carry out a very specific task because Voldemort trusts him as a Death Eater. I don't think at that point he's put two and two together and realises that it's just a punishment for what his father did the previous year. But it's very evident to us, the reader, even from another character's perspective, that throughout the year, Draco starts to struggle. And I believe that's because he finally realises he's never meant to succeed in this mission. All of it was a punishment from Voldemort. However, he still has to try. He still has to try and prove himself, and he still believes he cannot fail, even though he knows that succeeding probably isn't great for him either, because that was never the objective of Voldemort making him do this. I've always felt that a lot of the sympathy and love for Draco Malfoy is kind of misplaced, because the Draco that we see is just a school bully who, in the end, never really makes his choice of whether he wants to go fully good or fully bad, but seeing the Half-Blood Prince from Draco's perspective, I think could genuinely give us some sympathy towards the character. Because let's face it, whilst Draco isn't a very nice person, there's no doubt he's been manipulated by his family over the years. Draco is only behaving in a way that he deems acceptable because of the way that he's seen, in particular, his father and the people his father hangs out with behaving as well. And I think there would be a moment in the Half-Blood Prince book from Draco's perspective where all of this would probably click. Because even though I don't think he has a proper redemption in the Deathly Hallows, I do believe that by that point, he's realised that he's not cut out for this. He's not actually on the dark side. But how great would it be to see that entire character development happen in this book? And finally, the Deathly Hallows, I've gone for Severus Snape. So this was a really, really tough one, because there's one issue with picking Snape for this book. Snape dies before we'd find out what happens. So this is where I'm kind of just going to have to use a bit of BS and say, do you know what? It's a magical series. I'm sure there is still some way we could see what happened in the end, even though Snape would have died beforehand. I mean, hey, in the main Harry Potter series itself, there are still a handful of chapters where Harry isn't involved, so maybe you just have to do that towards the end of the book, potentially. But I just think Snape is too good of an alternative main character for the Deathly Hallows to not choose him. Because this is it. This is crunch time. Snape has chosen his side. He chose his side a long time ago. He was working with Dumbledore. But this is it. Dumbledore is no more. And we're coming to the end of Voldemort's reign, potentially. This is where Snape has to decide. Does his loyalty still lie with a man who isn't even here? And is he still willing to risk everything to bring down Voldemort due to things that happened years and years ago? And the answer is, of course, yes. Everything that Snape does, whether you love Snape, whether you hate Snape, everything that Snape is doing in this book, from becoming the headmaster at Hogwarts, from making sure that Harry gets the Sword of Gryffindor, from giving Harry the memory just before he dies, is all done to ensure that Harry can bring down Voldemort. And seeing Snape navigate this while having to make sure that Voldemort never works out that he is a secret agent would be fascinating. I mean, imagine seeing Snape's perspective trying to hunt down the 7 Potters on their way to the Burrow, trying to escape from Privet Drive towards the start of the book. Like, what was going through his head at that point? He knew that he had to pretend that he was a Death Eater and appear to be trying to stop them, but also he had to make sure that Harry got to the Burrow. It would just be a psychological minefield that would be incredible to read. That is my list. Let me know if you agree with my choices or if you would change any of them. Please like the video, leave a comment, and most importantly, hit subscribe, and I will hopefully see you next time. Goodbye.